welcome to Bible study. We have been in a series called Broken Heroes, where we've been tracking through different people in the Bible. We've been in the Old Testament, tracking through different people in the Bible. And tonight we're in the Holy Week, and we're not really talking about a hero. I think he's just broken. And there's not a lot of heroic in it at all. But I think this is a good conversation, especially in Holy Week. So this is kind of a special Holy Week edition of Broken Heroes minus the hero part. We're talking about Judas. And so let's pick up in our conversation with Judas and find out who this guy is. Let's just start Matthew 26. Matthew 26, starting in verse 1. This is what it says. It says, when Jesus had finished all these sayings, he said to his disciples, you know that after 2 days the Passover is coming, and the Son of Man will be delivered up to be crucified. And the chief priests and the elders of the people gathered in the palace of the high priest, whose name was Caiaphas. And they plotted together in order to arrest Jesus by stealth and kill him. But they said, not during the feast, lest there be an uproar among the people. Why not during the feast? Why didn't they want to arrest him during the feast?
I think that kind of goes along with one of the questions we had. Is they just didn't want to make a scene. They didn't want to be a mob or a riot type thing, and also probably even to make sure they had the right guy. That's probably what I would think. So they're not wanting to create a stir. They don't want to create a riot, because if you think about what we talked about with Palm Sunday, Pontius Pilate, the governor of this region, is coming in, and his whole purpose for being in Jerusalem at this time is to make sure there are no riots, there's no insurrection, because he's going to put that down.
Yeah, there's a lot of things going on right now in the Jewish world. Every good Jewish person is in Jerusalem right now. So you look at the Sadducees, the Pharisees, they're terrified that a lot of people might get mad. Not just the normal amount of people, but there is extra people there. Everyone is feeling very pious, they're very holy right now, going through the rituals of their feasts. So it's not just a normal city right now. This is extra, and then Jesus on top of that. If there are people that love Jesus, which we just saw with his triumphal entry, if there are people that actually love him, this might be a huge problem for them, then become a huge problem for the Romans, and then again it's a really big problem for the Pharisees if the Romans get on. Right. So they're trying to do it secretly, trying to be quiet with this, because if this blows up, there's a huge domino effect here.
There's another place, and you can find it in Scripture, and I wish I'd have pulled a reference before we started this, where they say if we let Jesus continue on, the word is that they'll come take away our place and our country. And so basically they'll take away our position, they'll take away everything that we have. So they were threatened by the Romans politically, threatened their power that they even had underneath what the Romans gave them. Let's skip down, and we find in verse 14 of the same chapter, Matthew 26. This is where we pick up with our person for the night. Then one of the 12 disciples, whose name was Judas Iscariot, went to the chief priest and said, what will you give me if I deliver him, talking about Jesus, over to you? And they paid him 30 pieces of silver, and from that moment he sought an opportunity to betray him. What's going on here?
I think he was an opportunist. I mean, he was the treasurer of the disciples. He was in control of the monies that flowed in and flowed out, and I believe this gave him an opportunity to kind of make, for lack of a better word, a side hustle for himself, and to also fulfill the prophecy that had been given back in Zechariah.
Now, I don't think it was just all about money here. I think money was part of it, but I don't know that was his motivating factor. If you read a little bit about just if he was a part of this group of people called the Zealots, and who were the Zealots?
They were an extreme group of Jewish leaders that wanted to overthrow the Roman by violence. So we've got
we've got the Romans who are they're the ones ruling everything. Then you've got these different factions in Israel at this time. You have the Zealots, who were just kind of this radical group, radical fringe group, guerrilla type warfare, maybe even assassins somewhat, if you can read that way. Who are some of the other groups that are playing in on this too, in this scenario?
You have the Pharisees, Sadducees, and Essenes. Essenes.
So the Pharisees probably would have been like the very conservative religious people. They're the church folk. Sadducees would have been more of the liberal type bent, where they're a group that wants to work with those who are in power. They're a little bit more wealthy, and it works in their benefit to work with those who are in power because they benefit from that. So you've got these different groups who are kind of surrounding Jesus, and we've got a couple of guys, Judas being one of them that's possibly a zealot. We've got another disciple who's in there. Simon, that's called a zealot. So a couple questions we want to ask tonight. So the first question that we're asking is this: how can you be that close to Jesus and not be changed? How does that happen?
I think it's a heart condition. As we talked about earlier, I feel like that, you could even come into church and you're that close. You could actually have the presence of God in the room, but yet you're not sensitized to a spirit because your heart is so hardened. And I think that's where maybe Judas was. His heart has gotten so hardened. His heart had been so hardened that he didn't have a relationship with Jesus, that he was, pretty much disconnected from him.
You said it just a minute ago. He was helping himself to the money bag. So what Judas did was not just a overnight type change for Judas. This was kind of a process of things working. It's little decisions, little choices. Now, I know we were talking earlier before we started the video, and we were talking about our discussion with David, how little choices in David's life led David to make those huge mistakes and mess ups and sin, just a mess in his life, create a mess. I think what we see the same thing happen here with Judas. Just small choices, little denials along the way. Little denials of who Jesus was wanting him to be and trying to lead him to be. And he winds up becoming the biggest traitor in all of history. I don't know what, I mean.
Yeah, I think when you're looking for an answer in one way and it comes a different way, and you're not flexible, you're not willing to be in tune, I think there's times you can miss the boat completely. I think we all do it in life. We think life's going to be one way and it's something else, and we're not happy, we miss it. I think it's Judas here in a lot of ways, where he's thinking more military, he's thinking power, violence, and Jesus comes and says, if you've ever looked at your brother in anger, you've committed murder.
Jesus takes that step. Yeah. He says, you heard it said, and this is the bar right here, but I am raising that.
And if you're Judas and you're not willing to change, you see Simon, who's called the same thing. He changes. He goes, and his heart is like Justin said, his heart is changed and his heart's not hardened. But then you have Judas who stays with tradition, stays with the way he was taught, and he misses it completely.
I think after a while, if kind of seeing the heart of Jesus, and maybe Judas begins to just disagree, that there's a clash of ideologies, and you got to make a decision. Am I going to stick with Jesus? Am I going to stick with my ideology? And I think probably Judas is sticking with his ideology, what he has grabbed hold of, where others are conforming to what Christ leads them in.
Well, it tells me that if we're not careful, we can get desensitized to the miraculous very quickly. Judas sees God do everything. Sees Jesus walk on water, raise the dead, cast out demons, and he still is not, stuff's not changing for him. And how easy, if he sees that, and we don't get to see Jesus face to face like him, how easy can we get desensitized to things with God?
And it's what you allow to rule your life. It's what you allow to consume you. And I think that's where a lot of people can be at today. What are those thoughts that consume you? What are those ideologies that consume you that maybe run in conflict with who Jesus is and what God's kingdom is? And we have to, I think we're Christians today, we're really good at trying to justify things, justify maybe those things that run contrary to what God's kingdom is, but we try to justify them. So, well, this is not so bad. Maybe that's where Judas was at. They were saying, well, it's not a bad thing for us to not want to be ruled by the Romans. And this was a conversation we had beforehand too, that, I think what Jesus sees is it didn't matter if the Romans were in power or if the Jews were ruling. You can still be controlled and you can still be a prisoner to things and ideas, even if you do have the power to rule over certain people. You can still be bound up. So there's another passage I want us to jump to. Do you have that there? I think it was in Mark. You read that for us?
It says
Mark 4. This is Mark 14.
Yes. All right. Mark 14, verse 10. It says, then Judas Iscariot, who was one of the 12, went to the chief priests in order to betray him to them. And when they heard it, they were glad and promised to give him money. And he sought an opportunity to betray him.
So he's looking for opportunities. That's a lot like what we read in Matthew. The other question that we had was this: how did he misunderstand what Jesus came to do? How can not just he, but how can we even misunderstand what Jesus came to do?
Yeah, again, I think we all have an idea of how Jesus works in our head. You see this later when Jesus he rises from the dead and he's walking to Emmaus, and there's two guys with him, and they're walking with Jesus for about 7 miles, and they don't even know it's Jesus. They're telling the story of Jesus rising from the dead to Jesus, but they're so unaware that this is him that they miss it. And I think it's the same thing with Judas. Like, man, if we're not looking for Jesus to work, or we are expecting him to work within a certain box, we can easily miss what he's doing. And Judas is expecting a certain type of leader, and even though over and over and over again Jesus is saying, I'm not that way. And
he begins to talk about his death.
Right.
And think about how maybe disheartening that would be for someone who thinks, oh, he's going to come in, he's going to kick out the Romans, he's going to set up his kingdom, we're going to be ruling, and then Jesus says, no guys, I'm going to die. Wait, that's not what I signed up for. That's not the kind of Jesus I want to see. There's this clashing that's going on. Even if you look at John 18, and Jesus is before Pilate. And Pilate, he says this in verse 35, Pilate answered, am I a Jew? Your own nation and chief priests have delivered you over to me. What have you done? And Jesus answered, he says, my kingdom is not of this world. If my kingdom were of this world, my servants would have been fighting. He understands that. Mm-hmm. That's what these guys, he understands that. There's a lot of people who are surrounding him. That's what they're expecting. They're expecting to battle it out, to draw swords, to take it out. But Jesus says, if that were my plan, my servants would have been fighting, that I might not be delivered over to the Jews. But my kingdom is not of this world.
But the interesting thing is, I know we're kind of jumping scripture, but you see that with Peter, when Jesus says, sell your cloaks, buy a sword. Peter, they would go to arrest Jesus. Peter pulls out a sword, cuts off the Roman's ear. He's ready to fight. They're all ready to say, let's go, we're going to war for this man. And Jesus is the only one saying, nope, this is not, you don't understand the plan. Yeah. We see this as Jesus, like we said, Jesus is walking to Jerusalem. He's telling them that he's going to die. He's telling them in 3 days he's going to rise again. They're like, yeah, Jesus, that's great. But who's sitting next to you in heaven? Like, they're missing the point here. All of them, not just Judas. All of them are missing the point here. And we see them all react in different ways. I mean, they all react differently. Judas just takes this to a totally different level. And
Well, and how they all respond, as we wrap this up. And the last question that I think I just had was, how was Judas and what he did any different from what Peter did? and what the other disciples did. Because didn't they deny him too?
Yeah, they did. I think they saw, especially Peter. He was reminded, because it said before the rooster crows 3 times, you will deny, or before the rooster crows, you'll deny me 3 times. And when that rooster crowed, it immediately shook him to his core to realize, you know what, I did exactly what Jesus said I was going to do. And I think he was very repentive, as opposed to Judas. He was not repentive. He actually became, when Jesus called, Jesus called him out at the Last Supper, and he said, "Who I give this morsel to is the one who's going to betray me." And when he did that, and
well, what did they all? They all went around the table. Is it me?
Is it me?
Is
Yeah.
it me? But didn't they all, in a way, deny him?
Yeah.
And I see the difference being that Judas was remorseful, but he wasn't repentant.
Mm-hmm.
You have Peter, you have these other disciples who they get brought back. Remorse is about feelings. Repentance is about actions.
Mm-hmm.
And so where Judas was all up in his feelings, but he let that take him to a place where he committed suicide. I think he could have been forgiven, but he shortcut the grace and mercy of God, and he wound up, being this person who has, got this on him for the rest of history. Yeah, you walked away from Christ and denied him. But you think about the love of God, you think about the mercy and grace of God. How big is the grace of Christ? It's big enough to bring back anybody who have walked away. You just got to be willing to receive that. So, I know there's probably more questions, and you can text us. You can shoot us, comment on Facebook. You could text to 912-400-0556. And just let us know. Let us know some questions that you have, maybe some comments, maybe some things that you're thinking about this whole story, about this idea of Judas. But we appreciate you staying with us tonight and just going through this Bible study. Guys, you want to say anything before we take off? Nope. No? Good. All right.
Good night.
Thanks, guys. Good
Thank
night.
you.